Chapter 234, Lehane 5. Eugene stood in place with his jaw agape, staring at Molin's approaching figure. The moron was exactly the same as Eugene had seen him a few days ago in the Great Hammer Canyon, except he wasn't holding an axe. However, what Molin was holding was none of Eugene's business. That BS. Eugene barely managed to swallow the words before they could escape his mouth. Instead, he uttered a curse in his mind. Bastard. When Eugene had gone through the trouble to see him, the moron had chased him out without even sharing a proper conversation. Molin had acted all solemn and shit as if he couldn't come down from the cliff for a profound reason. You swung your axe at a friend you met after 300 years with an expression as if we wouldn't see each other again. Son of a bitch. You should have at least said that you would be coming later. Eugene kept his expression under control while soothing the simmering heat boiling in his heart. He had never imagined Molin would descend from the Grand Hammer Canyon and come directly to Fort Lehane. It was the same with Molin's descendant. As far as he knew, the founder had never come down from the Grand Hammer Canyon after suddenly going into seclusion 100 years ago. Since then, a new tradition had been made that the descendants of the royal family had to go to the Grand Hammer Canyon to have their qualifications for the throne tested, even though no one, not even those from the royal family, knew why the founder had gone into seclusion. As expected, muttered Amon, looking around. His gaze found Eugene and Christina. Amon couldn't think of any other reason than the two for the founder's sudden descent from the mountain. Molin roar, muttered Gavid. His anxious heart was reflected in the black fog as it suddenly wriggled and squirmed. The demon knights brought their hands to the pommels of their swords in the fog in preparation for a possible battle. Gavid immediately raised his hand and dissuaded them. So you were alive? Asked Gavid. As you can see, answered Molin. A reunion after 300 years. Though I'm sure we've had plenty of chances to see each other in the meantime, neither of us wanted a meeting, continued Gavid. Obviously. Gavid Lindman. I've hated you since 300 years ago. Don't tell me you don't share the same sentiment, said Molin. Rather than classifying it as like or hate, I would say it's more of a reluctant feeling. After all, it was without a doubt that you were my enemy, responded Gavid. I'm glad you do not like me since I still hate you, retorted Molin. Then why did you command them to open the door? If you hate me, you shouldn't have a reason to allow me inside, asked Gavid. Because I don't think you'll just walk away, answered Molin. He stopped walking, then stared at Gavid and the black fog behind him. If I do not open the gate of the fortress, will you go back quietly? Can you swear that you won't spread that sinister mist to turn the night terrible in the snowfield? The only one who can have me declare an oath is His Majesty the Demon King, said Gavid. I thought so. So you won't back down, said Molin. Do you perhaps think I'll launch a cowardly ambush at night? Molin roar, I am not fond of such perverse actions, said Gavid. Maybe not. You said you would not swear an oath, so I cannot trust your words, answered Molin. It is still difficult for me to fathom your words. You are saying you do not trust me, yet you are willing to allow me and the black fog inside the fortress. Why is that? Asked Gavid. The snowfield is wide, said Molin while spreading his arms. If you hide in the vast snowfield and plot dirty, cowardly schemes, there is no way for me to see through it. You will sully the white of the snowfield. But if I let you into the fortress, I can watch you, and not just me either. Everyone else in the fortress will keep their eyes on you. Me hiding, plotting dirty, cowardly schemes. Huh. What a funny yet unpleasant thing to say, said Gavid with a grimace. He took great pride in being called the Sword of Incarceration and had strictly abided by his chivalry for more than 300 years. Regardless of what his enemies considered him, Gavid considered himself to be the only knight of the Demon King of Incarceration. If someone else had spoken those words, I would not have held back my anger. But Molin roar, since it's you, I will forgive it. I'm sure humans and demon folks have different definitions for dirty, cowardly schemes, said Gavid. You frequently plotted dirty, cowardly things since 300 years ago. The black fog spread throughout Pandemonium, interrupted resting warriors and ambushed them. You ambushed Hamel and Sienna, who were on a reconnaissance mission. Although you had the skills and the power, you only sat waiting high in the Demon King's castle while ordering around your lackeys, said Molin with a glare. But Gavid couldn't do anything but blink with confusion after hearing Molin's words. What was so dirty and cowardly about that? After a while he gave a response. There was a considerable number of troops that made it all the way to Pandemonium 300 years ago. The army of incarceration was strong, but we numbered far less than the humans. Therefore, in order for a small number of elite troops to effectively face a great army, ambushes were the right choice. It wasn't fought openly and squarely, responded Molen. I only encountered Hamel and Sienna coincidentally. Just as they were on a reconnaissance mission, I too was on a reconnaissance mission, continued Gavid. I know that. Gavid's eyebrows wriggled with annoyance at Molen's answer. He continued while feeling his frustration grow. Putting my subordinates at the forefront in the castle? What a bewildering thing to point out. It is my role to guard the side of His Majesty, the Demon King of Incarceration, under any circumstances. When you lot broke into Babel, It may be problematic for me to say this in this age of peace, but I wanted to be the first to stop you. I wanted to slaughter all of you, but I could not. Why not? Asked Molen. Because I knew how strong all of you were. If I came rushing out to meet you first in the heat of the moment, and if I died in the struggle, who would have guarded the side of His Majesty, the Demon King? Asked Gavid. So is it also due to loyalty you ran away at the end? Asked Molen. Gavid's face became devoid of an expression at Molen's question. He glared at Molen with a bloodless, pale face. You're reminding me of a shameful past, said Gavid. It is true that you ran away. You who blocked the door to the palace were destined to lose your head by Vermouth's sword, said Molen. It was the will of His Majesty. He commanded me to hide without blocking you any further. My merciful and generous lord prioritized the preservation of the life of a knight who fought until the end over his faith, continued Gavid. It does not change the fact that you ran away. You were lucky. If Hamel had been there, you never would have had the chance to escape, said Molen. Molen roar. This conversation has no meaning unless your intention is to anger me, said Gavid. Are you going to fight me? Asked Molen. I am warning you because I have no intention of fighting, responded Gavid. I do not intend to fight you either as long as you keep away from plotting dirty, cowardly things. Molen scoffed while pointing at the closed gate. Gavid Lindman. I do not know what you are up to, but if you do want to form a relationship with the heroes of this generation as you said, then prove your words with your actions. I do not scheme, said Gavid while raising his hand. The looming fog scattered and the demon knights were revealed. And there was no lie in what I said. Am quite interested in the heroes of this era. In particular, I am interested in Eugene Lionheart, Vermouth's descendant and the one chosen by the Holy Sword, as well as Christina Rogerus, the saint who looks just like a niece. I am interested in those two as well, said Molen. What are your thoughts? Molen roar. I have yet to speak a single word with them, but... Gavid raised his head and stared directly at Eugene and Christina before continuing. I can feel Vermouth from Eugene Lionheart and a niece from Christina Rogerus. It is distasteful of you to speak their names when you weren't a friend of theirs. Moreover, Vermouth was more handsome than Eugene Lionheart, and a niece was more like a warrior than Christina Rogerus, retorted Molen. Eugene did not know how to react to Molen's remark. Indeed, it was true that Vermouth had been handsome. However, objectively speaking, wasn't Eugene's face more handsome than Vermouth's? Sister, what does he mean by being more like a warrior? Asked Christina. Molen must be talking about cracking open the heads of demon folks with a mace when he talks about being more like a warrior. You don't need to take that idiot's words seriously, Anise replied. Thump, thump, thump. Molen resumed walking towards the castle, then stopped once he arrived right in front of the gate. Gavid Lindman. Let me tell you one thing. If you want to speak with Eugene Lionheart and Christina Rogerus and wish to form a relationship with them, you will have to ask me for my permission first, said Molen. Is it your desire to cherish and protect the descendants of your old friends? Asked Gavid. Already I don't like what you are saying. Protect them? From what? From something. From you. Then that means... Molen clenched his fist, nothing more. But to Gavid, Molen was currently larger than the gate, the fortress and even the snowy mountain Lahanjar in the distance. It had been truly a long time since he felt such intense pressure. He did not even feel like a human being back then. Is this what happens when such an existence lives for 300 years? Thought Gavid, feeling his skin go numb. Does that mean you are planning to harm Eugene Lionheart and Christina Rogerus? Asked Molen. The instant Molan asked the question, he looked even bigger than before in Gavid's eyes. He was a man of marvelously disciplined and refined power. After staring at Molan in silence for a moment, Gavid shook his head. No. He had no intention of harming them. Gavid wanted the humans to wage war. It was contrary to the will of his great lord, but if a war was inevitable, then the demon king of incarceration would no longer be in a position to show mercy to the continent. The hero and the saint would need to be at the forefront of the war, and their very existence would be the cause of war. So Gavid had no intention of hurting the two. He simply wanted to gauge his enemies of the future, and his heart was unmistakably sincere. Moreover, he really wanted to connect with and form a relationship with the heroes of the current era. It was all true, though it was for the sake of getting to know those whom he would enjoy slaughtering one day. I do not have such thoughts. I only want to form relationships with them. And if they do not want such a thing as a relationship, I will be satisfied watching them from a distance, said Gavid, taking a few steps back. Then he raised his hand and fixed his attire. Not even a small wrinkle could be found on his black uniform. There was not a single flurry of snow nor a speck of dust. Even so, Gavid calmly dusted the top of his uniform and checked that his buttons were fastened correctly. After doing so, Gavid politely bowed his head. Please, will you open the door to the fort? Molan stared at him for a moment before nodding. The intense pressure he had been emitting had completely disappeared. Turning back towards the fortress, Molan reached for the gate. To the door. Amon shouted after belatedly coming to his senses. Then, without waiting for the gatekeepers to act, he personally jumped down from the wall. He had not dared to intervene in the conversation below, a conversation between living legends. But now that the conversation was over, Amon did not want the founder of Ruhr, the bold king, to have to open the door with his own hands. It's been a long time, Amon, said Molan. It is an honor to have you remember me, responded Amon. I remember all my descendants. I am not so stupid as to forget the name of my descendant who visited me last, said Molan with a grin while patting Amon's shoulder. Amon was quite big, but standing next to Molan he looked smaller than he actually was. It was due to the differences in their presence. Amon peered at Molan with eyes of admiration before bowing deeply. Then he pushed open the gate of the fortress. The door was large and heavy, but Amon pushed it open as easily as any regular door. Amon did not head straight in but rather bowed once more towards Molan. The knights of Ruhr fought to be the first ones to come down from the fortress wall, and the tribesmen of Buyur had already lined the street in front of the gate. The Emperor of Kiel and the Pope of Uraz were the leaders of only two empires on the continent besides Helmuth. Although they did not hurry, they did not dare to remain standing on the walls either. They descended a bit later than the others and greeted the returning hero with their knights. Soon, countless knights lined the streets and made way for Molan. So the march began. Molan returned the welcome and the greeting of the kings with a smile and strode ahead while receiving respectful gazes from the knights as if it were natural. Are you not going to head in? Gavid was still standing in front of the gate. A knight of the Black Fog standing behind him asked politely, and Gavid shook his head with a smile. We'll go in after a little while. That road wasn't meant for Gavid and the Black Fog, and he was willing to show respect for such a thing. Eugene wasn't given a chance to talk to Molan alone, but it was the most natural thing. He was the founder of Ruhr and he had gone into seclusion about 100 years ago. He had suddenly returned when many had thought him dead. Immediately after the march, Molan headed to the castle where the kings were staying. Naturally, Amon accompanied him along with the other kings. It was none of Eugene's business what they would talk about there, but wasn't it quite obvious? They would ask why he had gone into seclusion and why he had returned. Eventually they would discuss what to do with Gavid Lindman and the Black Fog. Gavid Lindman and the Black Fog were residing on the outskirts close to the fortress wall. There was room for them in the buildings inside the fortress, but Gavid refused the offer and insisted on using an empty space on the outskirts as a campsite. Although Gavid had explicitly stated his interest in Eugene several times, he did not attempt to make any contact. The only interaction they shared was making eye contact a few times on the fortress wall. Gavid was probably showing respect to Molan's warning. That's better for me. Eugene did not want to become involved with Gavid already. Similar to Noir Giabella, Gavid Lindman was an existence Eugene was incapable of facing in his current state. Interest and curiosity? Probably. But a relationship? That's bullshit. Eugene snorted with disdain while walking. Christina, who was walking by his side, looked quite nervous. She continued to fidget with the hem of her robe, fixed her hair with her hands, took deep breaths and adjusted her expression. "Are you okay?" asked Eugene. I am fine. I am just a little flustered," answered Christina. Anise had insisted on not taking control of Christina's body for now. The body belonged to Christina and Anise was just sharing the space, so she insisted it was only proper for Christina to be the one to face and greet Molen first. It was even more important since she wasn't given the opportunity in Lehanjar. "There's no need to be so nervous. He's just an idiot," said Eugene. "To me. He wasn't the kind of person to be called so," answered Christina. Though they weren't given a chance to speak to him alone before, Molen invited the two of them. Beast King Amon personally came to the Lionheart's mansion and delivered Molen's invitation. So Eugene and Anise were walking down the hallway after climbing to the top floor of the castle tower. It was the same corridor that Eugene had walked in the previous day. Amon had only guided them downstairs, then remained behind in accordance with Molen's wish to speak to the two alone. As a result, there was no sign of any other life in the hallway, and although it was prudent to always be careful with words, regardless of where you were as the king's residence, the top floor was covered by a high-level defensive spell. As such, there was no reason for them to not speak their minds. "Not the kind of person to be." "You heard him talking to Gavid Lindman earlier, didn't you?" asked Eugene. "He was filled with majesty befitting a great hero of 300 years ago," responded Christina. "But what he said was still stupid. Maybe he sounds a bit more convincing now that he's gotten a bit older," muttered Eugene while staring up ahead. He could see a door at the corridor's end. After taking a deep breath, Eugene approached the door. "That idiot. He couldn't possibly think of swinging an axe again after calling me here, right? It wasn't possible, right?" Eugene snorted and grabbed the doorknob. But before he could even turn the doorknob, the door burst open, or rather it was hinged off. With it, Eugene was also flung into the air with the door with his hand on the knob. "Hamel!" shouted Molen. He stared straight ahead and blinked a few times. Christina gasped, even forgetting to give her greetings. "Where is Hamel?" he asked once more. "Hey, you idiot!" Eugene was still hanging in the air while holding the doorknob. He frowned, bewildered, and kicked Molen in the shoulder. "Why did you break the door for no?" "Hamel!" roared Molen once more. Boom! Eugene fell to the ground along with the door, and Molen stretched out his arms and tightly embraced Eugene. "I can't believe my eyes. Hamel, I didn't expect to see you again like this." It was suffocating. Eugene struggled for his life buried in Molen's stiff and humongous chest muscles. Chapter 235. Lehane 6. "I might die." Eugene truly thought so from the bottom of his heart. Molen's chest muscles were tightly inflated, and they just so happened to press down on Eugene's airway. Eugene struggled to escape, but the force that held him in place was beyond his imagination. Molen's arms were wrapped around Eugene's back, and it restricted Eugene to the point he couldn't raise his head. Slowly but surely, Eugene's body slowly molded into the shape that fit into Molen's muscles. I'm going to die." Not to mention that he couldn't breathe, the force that weighed down on him was too strong. Eugene started to convulse and his mind began to dim, but even at that moment, Molen continued to cry out Hamel's name. Eugene's head felt hot and damp. It was because of the thick, gooey tears flowing down onto Eugene's head. "Christina, if this goes on, Hamel might really die," said Anise. She could no longer stand idly as life withered from Eugene. "Do you think you can really stop him with your skinny hands? Christina, the flail hanging on your waist looks like the perfect tool to smack that idiot's head. Don't worry. Even if you swing the flail with all your might, it won't even leave a scratch on that blockhead." "But sister, how could I be so disrespectful to him when it's my first time seeing him?" "Look, Christina. Hamel is about to die," Anise exclaimed urgently. Christina made up her mind at Anise's urgent words. She unfurled her robes before drawing the flail, which had been fixed to her waist and thigh. After whirling the weight at the end of the chain once in the air, she directed it to Molen's head. The impact of adamantium meeting flesh was an unsettling collision, but the resulting sound that echoed in the air was incongruous with the reality of the situation. Christina felt slightly nervous after delivering the blow, But contrary to her expectations, she was shocked to see not even a single scratch left on Molin's forehead, let alone a drop of blood. Huh. Even so, the attack produced the desired effect. Molin came to his senses and turned his tearful eyes toward Christina. "Oh!" cried Molin once more while shedding tears once more. His arms opened wide and Eugene's limp body fell to the ground. After walking past Eugene's sprawling figure, Molin approached Christina. "Oh. Hello, Sir Molin roar. I am," started Christina. "Christina Rogerus. You really look just like a niece. I wasn't able to greet you properly the last time because of the situation," said Molin. "Oh. Yes," responded Christina while staring at Molin's broad chest with fear in her eyes. When she saw him approaching with his squirming muscles, she couldn't help but think of how Molin had squeezed the life out of Eugene. It looked as if he was approaching her with the same idea. "Hey, you idiot!" called out Eugene while staggering to his feet. Eugene coughed a few times before conjuring a ball of mana, which he then hurled at the back of Molin's head. Boom. It was a powerful projectile containing quite a bit of power, but it didn't even cause Molin's head to budge. "Why the fuck did you hug me like that all of a sudden? I almost died because of you," shouted Eugene. "Hamel!" exclaimed Molin before stopping in his tracks. With a broad smile, he shifted his gaze between Eugene and Christina. Then he burst into laughter while shedding thick tears. "I never thought I would get to meet you two like this. So I am so glad to see you two like this again." Eugene couldn't possibly keep complaining when Molin seemed so glad to see them. Laughing at the same time he cried. Eugene took on a bitter expression while massaging his stiff back. "Is a niece inside of you?" Molin directed the question to Christina. Christina had been standing, stunned, speechless. His question startled her, but she quickly composed herself and nodded. "Yes. I'm glad to meet you and this is fun and mysterious, but if you don't mind, would you allow me to say hello to a niece?" asked Molin. "Of course I will." Christina bowed before closing her eyes. After a moment, Christina's shoulders shuddered. "Have you become a little wiser after living for 300 years? Or have you just gotten faster at picking up clues?" asked a niece. "A niece?" shouted Molin. "Yes, that's right. I am a niece Slywood. But Molin, how did you recognize me? As I remember, you were neither wise nor tactful enough to recognize me from the top of that cliff just from my wings," asked a niece. "It's because I became able to see," said Molin while wiping away the stream of tears. "My eyes have become very bright since 100 years ago. It was a change that came because I lived where it was needed. Anise, I can see that there are two souls inside that body. The souls of the two of you are alike and connected like twins, or rather as if they are originally from the same soul. I can't see the distinct form of your soul, but I can feel the familiarity." "You came to see the soul? What kind of?" said Anise. "And Hamel. The same goes for your soul. It's familiar, nostalgic, and intimate. Even if your body has changed, you are definitely still Hamel," continued Molin. Even though he was wiping away his tears, it didn't look like he was about to stop crying anytime soon. Eugene felt sorry to see Molin crying like a baby with a large, rough face. He was reminded of the dream shown to him by Anise in the Samar forest when Molin had been bawling in front of Hamel's tomb. "Hey, stop crying. Why do you keep crying like an idiot when we're right here?" asked Eugene. "These are noble tears. Tears fit to be shed by true warriors," said Molin. "Leave him alone, Hamel. Molin will not stop crying no matter what you say. You may not know this, but 300 years ago, Molin was more stubborn than anyone else when it came to crying," said Anise. Everyone had wept when Hamel died in the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration. However, in terms of the number of tears shed, Molin had taken the lead by a significant amount. Sienna had wept, Anise had cried quietly in despair, Vermouth had turned his gaze upwards and glared at the next floor while shedding tears, and Molin pounded his fists against the floor and bawled, creating a pool of tears on the ground. When Molin cries, it's better to leave him alone. "If you let him cry for an hour he should," said Anise. "No, you should not leave me alone." "Anise, Hamel, come closer," interrupted Molin, spreading his arms wide and widening his tear-filled eyes. Both Eugene and Anise stiffened at his terrifying invitation. But Molin didn't seem to care how they reacted. He started taking large steps toward them without waiting for them to acknowledge his words. Large, thick arms wrapped around Eugene and Anise. Although the two looked rather reluctant, they made no effort to escape their friend's grasp. They allowed themselves to be brought into his embrace side by side as if they were one. The only things that bothered them were that Molen was way too big and he cried way too much. My hair is all wet. The streams that rolled down Molen's eyes completely soaked the top of Eugene and Anis's heads. They stood still in his arms for quite a while. There wasn't much talking, just the silent gratification of each other's presence and warmth. They simply stood there, feeling each other's presence. Although he had already died and was reincarnated, Hamel was here as Eugene. Anis had also died, but she was here sharing Christina's body. Molen was here as well. The three perceived, touched, and felt each other's presence. Although it was a simple gesture, a hug, the time they spent in silence was precious and invaluable. And, although Eugene dismissed it as not a big deal, he strangely felt his tears threatening to fall. He had never felt emotions this strong so often when he had been Hamel. It's because of Vermouth. The ancestor of his current body was Vermouth, so if there was anything unsatisfactory or wrong with him, it was all because of Vermouth. At least, that's what Eugene told himself as he held back his tears. When he stole a glance at Anis, he saw her weeping silently. Seeing that, he no longer felt a need to hold back his tears. So Eugene cried. Even though he didn't cry as much as Molen, he allowed his tears to flow for a little while, just long enough for his emotions to quench. After a while, the hugging and the crying concluded. Anis immediately stepped away from Molen as if she had been waiting for this moment, then urgently washed her hair in the bathroom next door. Eugene also washed his hair next to Anis, and although Molen did not join them, he wiped his wet face and beard using a large bedsheet as a towel. Are you not going to ask us anything? Said Anis while taking a seat on an empty sofa. Eugene had summoned the wind to dry their hair, and she was combing her silky hair with her hands. Molen, I'm sure you are having difficulties understanding our presence in this era. That is true, but that's not what's most important to me. You two are in front of me now and I am still alive. For me, that is the most important thing that makes me the happiest, responded Molen. I envy you for being able to think so simply. But Molen, you need to know what happened for us to be here now. That way, you will be able to share what you experienced until now as well, right? Said Anis. Molen gazed at her with a hint of confusion, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly as he processed her words. For a moment he remained still, his expression inscrutable. Then he blinked in an almost mechanical fashion. It seemed he had not grown any wiser after all. Anis clicked her tongue while crossing her legs. Well, I'm not saying anything complicated, am I? It's been hundreds of years since we've last seen each other, so let's share stories and talk. It just so happens that Hamel has quite a bit of alcohol in his cloak to help us enjoy the stories. Eugene's cloak unfurled at her words and Mare poked out her head. What is it? Asked Eugene. I would also like to give my greetings to Sir Molen, Lady Sienna's comrade, said Mare. Oh, by the gods! Shouted Molen with shock. He approached Eugene with large strides, then lowered his imposing stature and locked gazes with Mare. Hello there, Sir Molen. My name is Mare Meridian. I am a familiar created by Lady Sienna. You look just like Sienna, exclaimed Molen without bothering to let her finish. Yes. I was created in the image of Lady Sienna's childhood. I see. A little Sienna created by Sienna, so that would make you Sienna's daughter, right? Asked Molen with a wide grin. He then stroked her head. Nice to meet you. I am Molen Roar, a comrade and friend of Sienna. After exchanging pleasantries, the four settled around a sturdy wooden table. Anis's eyes silently bore into Eugene, who fidgeted before producing an array of bottles from the depths of his cloak. The clink of glass and liquid echoed throughout the room as he arranged them meticulously on the floor. Molen excused himself briefly before re-entering the room with an armful of his own prized bottles. Each one gleamed with an expensive sheen, their labels announcing their rarity and refinement. It was evident that he intended to spare no expense for their reunion. What about snacks? Asked Eugene. A true drinker takes alcohol as their snack, responded Anis. But I don't want to, muttered Eugene. But it wasn't as if he could ask to have snacks delivered from downstairs. He longed for something to accompany their alcohol, and at the very least he wished for glasses to drink out of. But before he could voice his desires, Anis began to chug down entire bottles of liquor. Molen followed suit, and their actions ignited a competitive flame within Eugene's heart. He quickly seized his own bottle, determined not to be outdone, and started chugging it down as well. With a quizzical expression, Mare observed the trio through squinted eyes while sipping on her juice. Despite having been created 2 centuries ago, she wanted to consider herself an eternal child. To her, the idea of growing up and becoming an adult like the 3 before her was an unappealing prospect. Despite being way older than her appearance, she clung to her childlike wonder and refused to relinquish it. I see. However, drinking was not the only thing on the agenda. Amidst the clinking of glasses, they delved into deep conversation, touching upon a plethora of topics. Anise, in particular, shared her story calmly, detailing how she had come to be the way she was. She spoke with an air of nonchalance, her words flowing easily from her lips as if they were of no consequence. "Molin, do you remember the letter I sent you?" asked Anise. "I kept it forever. Once it got so old that the paper started to break apart, I chewed it up and swallowed it," answered Molin. "I think I asked something I should not have. Frankly, it's quite unpleasant to hear what you did to it," said Anise with a grimace. To the world at large, Anise's departure on a pilgrimage had marked her disappearance from public view. The truth, however, was known only to the upper echelons of Eurus. They alone had been privy to the details of her demise, and they made use of her remains as a relic for 300 years. Though Molin had not been privy to the full extent of the truth, he knew that Anise's supposed departure on a pilgrimage had been a ruse to conceal her untimely demise. The truth had been revealed to him through a letter that Anise had penned before taking her own life within the audience chamber of the Pope. It had been her final wish. "It wasn't really a will, just a letter. I told you that my body had reached its limit, that it was impossible to forcibly prolong my life any longer. I told you that I was going to die and that I wasn't going to reveal my death to the world, so you should not express your condolences and keep it to yourself. You weren't to come to Eurus either. We would once again reunite in heaven after you lived your life." She lifted the bottle to her lips and downed its contents in a single impressive gulp. Then she wiped her lips with the back of her hand before grinning widely, the satisfaction of the feat apparent in her expression. "It was that kind of letter. Thankfully, Molin understood my letter and did what I asked him to," she continued. Molin's eyes grew red and teary again, the emotional turmoil resurfacing despite having cried his eyes out earlier. The depth of his emotion was evident in the way his chest heaved with each breath. "There was no reason not to. Anise, you asked me in the letter, didn't you? You asked me as a friend, and I do not ignore the requests of my friends," said Molin. "I wrote that letter because I knew you were that kind of person. If I had disappeared without writing a letter, Molin, you would definitely have stormed Eurus," said Anise. "I would have," said Molin. It was true. He would have, and he did not deny it. Eugene shared his own story of death and rebirth, detailing the circumstances that led to his reincarnation. As he spoke, Siena's name naturally arose, inextricably linked to his own tale of resurrection. Molin remained silent, listening intently to Eugene's words as he downed another bottle of alcohol. He understood the gravity of the situation, recognizing the need for the story to be told in its entirety without interruption. After listening to the fairly long story, Molin put down his bottle of alcohol. "I once tried to find Sienna a long time ago." The fact that Aroth had sent numerous search teams across the continent in a desperate bid to locate Sienna was well known, as well as Molin's participation. However, despite Ruhr's support and the tireless efforts of the search teams, no trace of her had been found, even after wandering the vast expanse of the continent for an extended period of time. After stepping down from the throne, I also headed personally to Samar. But I could not find it. The territory of the World Tree and the elves did not open its doors to me, said Molin. Even for Molin, entering the territory of the elves had been an impossible feat, as it was protected by the World Tree. While it might have been feasible in the past, the World Tree had sealed off its territory after Ryzakia's attack, rendering it virtually impregnable. The barrier was so effective that it was impossible to even perceive its existence without possessing a leaf from the World Tree, leaving many would-be intruders thwarted in their attempts to enter. Sienna is strong. I lived for hundreds of years, so I naturally assumed that Sienna would as well. When Sienna disappeared, I thought it was because she had gone into seclusion to train so that she could achieve her wish, continued Molin. Wish? Asked Eugene. Are you really asking me because you don't know Hamel? As with the rest of us, Sienna wanted to avenge you. No, she was obsessed with getting your revenge. After becoming the head of one of Aratha's magic towers, she holed herself up and immersed herself in creating magic, responded Molan. He closed his eyes, paused, then continued. But I never imagined she was attacked by Vermouth. And Raiskia. Honestly, all of this is hard to believe. But since you're telling me it's true, I will absolutely believe it. Molan's eyes snapped open and he fixed his unwavering gaze upon Eugene and Anise. And just as I believe in you two, I also believe in Vermouth. The Vermouth I know would not have attacked Sienna. Hamel, if Vermouth needed the necklace Sienna had for your reincarnation, he would have talked to her about it. There was no reason Sienna would have refused your reincarnation, right? Said Molan. Eugene agreed with Molan, and Vermouth's vision had said something similar in the dark room. Sienna still has the necklace containing your soul, but I'm planning on convincing her one day to get it. However, Vermouth's actions were in contrast to his words. He faked his own death and lured Sienna out in a deceitful manner. He trespassed into Hamel's tomb and attacked Sienna's familiar, which had been guarding the tomb. The reason behind his choices was unknown to Eugene, but Vermouth had then unsealed Hamel's coffin, taken his corpse, then sealed the moonlight sword inside the coffin. When Sienna arrived at the tomb belatedly, Vermouth attacked her, leaving a gaping hole in her chest. Sienna had not used the leaf of the world tree that she had with her. She would have died at Vermouth's hands right then and there. Dice a result. Vermouth successfully stole the necklace from Sienna, and Hamel was ultimately reincarnated as Vermouth's descendant. The necklace ended up in the Lionheart family's treasury. Eugene was puzzled by Vermouth's actions. When he considered each action individually, some of it made sense. However, when he tried to put them together as a whole, it didn't add up. There were 3 actions that were all typical of Vermouth: sealing the moonlight sword, causing Hamel's reincarnation, and hiding the necklace in the Lionheart family's treasury. But leaving Hamel's body outside the door and attacking Sienna for the necklace didn't make sense. These weren't things that Vermouth would have done. We trust Sir Vermouth as well, Anise said firmly, refusing to entertain any doubts about his actions. Her bond with Vermouth Lionheart and her comrades, forged through their travels in Helmuth, was too strong to be shaken. Sienna, too, had expressed her trust and lack of resentment towards Vermouth even after being attacked by him. But I am certain something must have happened to Sir Vermouth. Otherwise, there was no reason for him to have done such things. I'm not completely sure what, but something must have happened between Vermouth and the Demon King of Incarceration. Perhaps it was something he had to give in exchange for the promise of peace. If Vermouth had been threatened or coerced by the Demon King of Incarceration, he could have easily attacked Sienna. Even now, Vermouth's soul may be in possession of the Demon King of Incarceration, said Anise. Molan listened in silence for a while. Anise continued while tossing back the bottle she had finished. Molan, now it's your turn. Why did you suddenly declare seclusion 100 years ago? And why were you in the Great Hammer Canyon? Why did you drive us out a few days ago? And the Nur. What was that monster? I don't think the energy I felt was just an illusion. Both Anise and I felt a similar energy from the Nur as the Demon King of Destruction. Eugene continued with Anise's questions. Eugene had pondered over this thought repeatedly, but the answer eluded him. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that a creature living in the remote Northlands could emit the same ominous aura as the Demon King of Destruction, who had never left Revesta in centuries. It didn't make sense. He rubbed his chin, lost in thought. The more he thought about it, the less sense it made. He struggled to understand how the Nur, located in Lahanjar, could emit the same ominous feeling as the Demon King of Destruction, who had not left Revesta in 300 years. Hamel, Anise. After a brief silence, Molan called out. 300 years ago, I was the first one to meet Vermouth among us. Right. The story was well known to Eugene, one he had heard many times before from Molan in his past life. Vermouth had come from the kingdom of Ashel, which had been situated next to Helmuth. However, the only noteworthy accomplishment attributed to Ashel in history was the rise of Vermouth Lionheart, as it was the first kingdom to fall during Helmuth's conquest 300 years ago. The few survivors of the kingdom had been captured by the demon folks and taken as prisoners. They were transported to Helmuth, where they became experimental subjects for black wizards, toys of the demon folks, or worse, sacrifices. Back then, those enslaved by Helmuth were never allowed a peaceful death. The horrors that took place within the dark walls of Helmuth had been too ghastly to imagine. Vermouth had been one such slave, and he had been in the process of being brought back to Helmuth after being captured by demon folks and black wizards. To survive. That was what Vermouth had said. He had stolen a demon's blade with only that one thought. That was the first time he ever wielded a sword, but he managed to kill dozens of demons and black wizards. Afterward, he escaped Helmuth with the other slaves who had been captured. In the process, he killed hundreds of demonic beasts and rescued other slaves. After escaping Helmuth, he reached the snowfield the Buyur tribe had taken as their home. That was where he had met Molen. I met Vermouth before any of you and I fought together with him. I was a brave warrior already, but Vermouth was already a hero. At first, none of us were heroes, none except Vermouth. We became heroes after spending time and fighting alongside Vermouth, said Molen. Yes, we were definitely heroes. Although not in satisfactory form or shape, we saved the world. And yet, Hamel and Anise, your ends were unfortunate. Hamel, you died in a battle against the staff of incarceration. Anise, you informed me of your death through a letter. Sienna hid without telling anyone the truth, and Vermouth died, continued Molen. He didn't die, muttered Eugene. In response, Molen emptied another bottle. That may be the truth, but I thought Vermouth was dead. I saw the body myself and I moved his coffin. In the end, I was left alone. Alone I lived for a long time. Until now, he said while placing an empty bottle upright on the table. I thought of myself as a hero, a warrior. So I hoped for an ending befitting a hero and a warrior. As the king of Ruhr, I didn't want to die with all the people mourning for me, said Molen. Contemplate. My body did not grow old and I remained strong. Even after the age of 100, I was still in my prime as a warrior. How could I use this power? Everyone was calling me a hero, but the heroes I called my friends were no longer with me in this world. Molen's lips squirmed and he continued with an unbecoming bitter smile. I wondered if I should challenge Helmuth once again. But after thinking about it over and over, I decided not to. This peace was something Vermouth earned because of the oath. If I challenged Helmuth again, it would break the peace. I was sure of it. And I knew well that I could never kill the demon king of incarceration, let alone the demon king of destruction, on my own. Molen's solitude had been long, and his worries had not been something that time could solve. It was Vermouth who gave me a new mission, said Molen. What? 150 years ago, when Anise and Sienna were gone, when I was the only one alive, Vermouth appeared in my dream and said this. Climb Lehanjar. See Ruguyarn. Watch out for what comes from beneath. Vermouth, said Molen, said he would leave it to me. Molen, a hero and a warrior who longed for a befitting death, had encountered Vermouth in his dreams. Vermouth had asked him for a favor. 100 years ago, as Vermouth warned, they began to come from the end of Roguyarn, continued Molen. The old legend of the Buyur tribe Molen mentioned before. Beyond Lehanjar lies Roguyarn. A desolate land of nothingness, a land that must not be crossed, the end of the world. The tribe of Buyur resides in Lehane and Lehanjar to prevent anyone from crossing into Roguyarn, as well as to protect anything from crossing over from Roguyarn. In the deepness of the night, the Nur rises in Roguyarn. The Nur treads the wide stretch of land and crosses over into Lehanjar. Any children who refuse to sleep would be devoured by the Nur. I believe in Vermouth. So Molen never doubted Vermouth. Chapter 236. Lehane 7. In the past, Molen had failed to come up with a solution to his concerns. As the sole survivor of the Heroes' Party, he had faced the difficult decision of whether to maintain the fragile peace they had achieved with Vermouth or take up the mission his fallen comrades had failed to achieve. During the time of his dilemma, Vermouth had appeared in Molen's dreams, providing the answer to his reality. With this revelation, Molen was able to find peace in his decision and no longer had to agonize over the choice he was faced with. Furthermore, his body, which had not aged for hundreds of years, was in the perfect condition to complete Vermouth's request. Had Vermouth's prediction of the end not come to fruition, Molen would not have had such unwavering trust in him. However, the end did indeed cross over from Roguyarn, just as Vermouth had warned. Molen's dream, which had occurred 150 years prior, was no mere figment of his imagination but a forewarning of the impending doom that started 100 years ago. After I had that dream, I lived in Lehanjar. I saw Roguyarn every single day, Molen explained. Lehanjar towered over the surrounding landscape with its rugged, imposing form, but to Molen, it was a place of comfort and familiarity. Every day as the sun sank below the horizon he did the arduous climb to the summit and gazed out at Roguiarn in the distance. And each morning he descended the mountain. Each day was busy and fulfilling, and at that time I was no longer the king of Roar. There was no one to complain even if I lived in Lehanjar, continued Molen. But that didn't mean Molen confined himself to Lehinajar. He would occasionally attend important events in Roar. This was before he retreated into seclusion. Roguiarn was not even a little bit different from what I saw when I was young. Even so, I trusted Vermouth. He had warned me even after his death, and I knew he wasn't a man to make pointless warnings and requests. I agree, Eugene whispered softly, with Anise nodding in agreement beside him. Vermouth Lionheart, they knew, was not one to rely on others for assistance or favors. He was a man who preferred to take on challenges himself, and if he deemed a task impossible, then it was unlikely that anyone else could accomplish it either. Vermouth was similar in his approach to giving warnings. He preferred to avoid situations where he was forced to do so. If there was a warning that he felt compelled to give, it meant that the situation was unavoidable and he had no other recourse. Such situations definitely warranted careful attention and vigilance. Molen spoke with conviction. As Vermouth had warned, the end did come. So it could only mean that the person who appeared in my dream was indeed Vermouth. Thus, I believe all his requests and warnings hold true and should be taken seriously. What exactly do you mean by the end? Asked Eugene, giving the bottle in his hand a little shake. Do you mean the Nur? He continued, recalling the giant horned monkey and the monster that emitted the same ominous energy as the Demon King of Destruction. The Beast King had mentioned that the Nur he had seen had taken the form of a giant snake. In the language of the snowfield, the word Nur means the end and death. The end and the Nur don't mean different things. The end of life is death, and this truth applies to everything, responded Molen. The Nur I saw was just a large monkey. It didn't really fit the definition of death and the end, said Eugene. But Hamel, you said you felt something ominous from the Nur. Anise, you must have felt the same way as well, said Molen. He turned his head and peered out the window, looking towards Lehanjar over the fluttering snow. 300 years ago we felt the end just by seeing that existence from a distance. More than anything else we saw in Helmuth, that existence made us realize the end. Molen was speaking of the Demon King of Destruction. Molen clenched his fist as he spoke. I don't know why the Nur emits the same ominous energy as the Demon King of Destruction. Vermouth never mentioned anything like that either. But to me it's not extremely important. The end comes no matter what we do. It comes from Roguiarn and crosses over Lehanjar at will. It must be stopped. It cannot be allowed to cross over. When I first saw the Nur 100 years ago, those were the thoughts that came to my mind. There had been no warning. Molen ascended the peak of Lehanjar, a routine he had followed for decades. He gazed upon Roguiarn, a sight he had grown accustomed to over time. However, on this particular day there was an absence of familiarity. He couldn't pinpoint exactly when or where the shift began, but he knew that everything was different. As Molen climbed up the mountain, his feelings of unease continued to intensify. He pushed his body forward, struggling to reach the summit, where he could finally lay eyes on Roguiarn. However, once he reached the top, there was nothing to see but a barren wasteland devoid of any signs of life. After seeing the dead land, he turned his head at a sudden, unknown sense of fear. The Nur had been standing behind Molen. Do you remember when we saw the Demon King of Destruction? Asked Molen. How could I ever forget, said Eugene. I will never forget the sense of urgency and the emotions I felt no matter how many times I die, said Anise. The mere presence of the Demon King of Destruction had instilled a deep sense of hopelessness, causing a strong impulse to end one's life, regardless of their past, present, or future. It had evoked an overwhelming feeling of terror, a fear so intense that it could not be faced without resorting to self-harm. No one had even entertained the thought of fighting against it. Rather, their only thought was to never approach the fearsome existence. The Demon King suddenly appeared in a place where we could see it. We know how many people the Demon King of Destruction killed in that place, but we do not know why and how such an existence appeared there, said Molen. The Demon King of Destruction was such an existence. It was a living, moving disaster beyond human comprehension. Although Revesta was the territory of the Demon King of Destruction, it had wandered through Helmuth 300 years ago. It was impossible to even guess where the Demon King of Destruction would appear at any given time. 300 years ago, it had suddenly appeared without any prior warnings or signs. It brought along destruction with its presence. It had been the same then. When they looked up, they saw the Demon King of Destruction beyond the mountain. It had been impossible to make out its exact appearance. The Demon King of Destruction had appeared like a giant, inexplicable phenomenon, a mixture or a mass of color. That was what they had seen. It brings me painful humiliation to say this, but we ran at that time. I was and still am a brave warrior, but I wanted to never face that existence. I knew that I would face unconditional death if I fought it. I felt that my existence would disappear, continued Molen. Molen wasn't the only one who had felt that way. Hamel had also felt the same sense of fear and urgency, and ultimately, everyone there had turned to flee. It was Vermouth who had taken the lead, shouting that they needed to run. We ran far, but that existence was simply too big. We could see it with our eyes no matter how far we ran, said Molen. Right, agreed Eugene after a moment. They had only stopped fleeing when they no longer saw the Demon King of Destruction. To be precise, the Demon King of Destruction had disappeared. The Nur is incomparably weaker than the Demon King of Destruction, but they are similar to the Demon King of Destruction, continued Molen. They suddenly appeared before one's eyes and exuded an unpleasant, ominous energy. They spread death and brought the end, as their name suggested. The first day I saw the Nur, I killed the Nur. Then I declared seclusion to the royal family. Things had changed from before, and since then Molen never came down from Lahanjar. There were no patterns in the emergence of the Nur. They appeared during the day one day and during the night another. There were times when dozens would appear on the same day and times when none appeared for days. On the first day I saw the Nur, Vermouth appeared in my dream again. He apologized in my dream, but what was there to be sorry about? Rather, I felt sorry for Vermouth. I felt joy, sadness, and even gratitude for his words. I knew Vermouth would not have wanted to ask me for this favor, but there must have been no one else. He asked me because it was something he could not do. So Molen had told him, I will continue to stay on this mountain and kill the Nur. It doesn't matter to me what the Nur is. But no one will want the end to cross over, and I don't want it either. What did Vermouth say after hearing your words? Asked Eugene a beat later. He said nothing. Vermouth took on an expression that was unbecoming for him. Then he disappeared. Although that was the last day I dreamt of Vermouth, I felt the power he gave me, said Molen. Power? Asked Eugene. My eyes became very bright. Wherever the Nur appears in the wide Lahanjar, I can spot it right away. I can see how those evil creatures are born and how they move. I can see Christina Rogerus inside a niece right now, responded Molen. He continued while staring outside at Lahanjar. The Nur is an ominous existence that terrifies people even without them having to see it in person. And it is big. The corpse of the Nur exhales and bleeds poison even after dying. The blood of the Nur stains the snow and deprives the mountain of life. Eugene was astounded by Molen's dedication to blocking the path of the Nur for 100 years. He couldn't even begin to imagine the number of Nur that Molen must have killed during that time. If what Molen said was true and the Nur emitted a poisonous aura, then the poison from the Nur he had slain over the years would have spread throughout Lahanjar, covering the mountain in a deadly haze. However, although Lahanjar was a hell of a mountain with endless snow, it wasn't covered with an ominous energy powerful enough to cause suicidal thoughts. Eugene remembered the incident in the Great Hammer Canyon vividly. Molen had fought fiercely with the giant Nur, killed it, and in the end both he and the Nur had disappeared in an instant. Eugene had climbed up the cliff to investigate, but there was no trace of Molen or the Nur left behind, not even a drop of blood. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Eugene also remembered the Lionheart family's treasure room and the dark room deep in the basement. It had utilized magic that was unlike any other magic he had seen. If it had to be classified, it could be called spatial magic, but it had been impossible for Eugene to comprehend the magic even using Akasha. Vermouth did not explain to me about the ability, but I knew how to use it. Kill the Nur and toss it in. It's an excellent ability, explained Molen. The idea was not difficult to fathom. On the other side of Lahanjar, there must have been an unseen world, even beyond the reach of archwizards. Molen had likely stored the Nur's corpses in that realm, building a mountain of the monstrous creatures that bled black blood so as not to defile his beloved mountain. Molen, Eugene couldn't help but speak. Are you living on because of Vermouth's request? He had to ask. I'm not dying because I want to, responded Molen with a smile. I am living a valuable life as a warrior. By following the request of an old friend, I am protecting my beloved snow mountain, the snow field, the nation I raised with my own hands, and the world. For 100 years, Eugene finished Molen's unsaid words. Didn't I tell you, Hamel? This is a worthy life as a warrior. I do not want to die ugly of old age. I want to die a warrior, die a hero. Although death is a long way off for me now, if I die because I lack power, then the bodies of the Nur will prove the life I lived as a warrior and a hero, continued Molen. Eugene didn't have anything to say to this. And the descendants who continue my legacy will stop the Nur on my behalf. This is only natural for a warrior of Beer and the king of Roer. Don't you resent Vermouth? He explained nothing to you. He didn't say why the Nur suddenly appeared or why he had to ask you to do this, said Eugene. Hamel, do you really think such things are important? Asked Molen. Eugene couldn't find any response. Molen continued with a chuckle upon seeing Eugene hesitate. I was the only person Vermouth could rely on. 300 years ago, if I had died instead of you and Vermouth had to ask someone else the same favor, he would have asked you. Then, Hamel, would you have refused Vermouth's request? I would not have refused. It's not just you and me either. Even if it were Sienna and Anise, they would have never refused. Hamel, Anise, what did you two first feel when you first saw the Nur? Asked Molen. They had to kill it. That was the first thought that came to mind. An existence that exuded the same ominous energy as the demon king of destruction could not be allowed to exist, so they had to kill it. I thought the same. Even if Vermouth had not asked, I would have killed the Nur if I had seen it. Even if Vermouth did not ask me to, I would have made it my mission to live in Lehanjar to block and kill the Nur, said Molen. Of course you would have, said Anise with a chuckle. She buried herself deeper into the sofa and rested her chin on her hand. We made various excuses, but we were all sincere about saving the world. Even if we weren't all like that from the beginning, after fighting together for decades, all of us eventually accepted the mission to save the world. That was our desire. Heroes. The war is over and the world has become peaceful. We know how desperately the world needed this and how desperate we were. Although what we achieved was different from our ideal world, we dedicated everything for this peace. If any existence threatened this peace, we would have killed it regardless of whether Sir Vermouth asked for it or not. If that existence continued to appear, I would have devoted the rest of my life to exterminating it without hesitation, continued Anise. Anise had been given another option at the end. She could have chosen to disregard the future of the world. She could have abandoned what had shackled her for her whole life, the Holy Empire and her faith. She could have taken her life quietly in a place with no one without benefiting the Holy Empire. However, she had not chosen to do so. She had suddenly changed her mind in the desert where Hamel's tomb was located. She found herself unable to abandon the world. She remembered the stupid man whom she loved, the man who fought until his body was broken and moved no more. So she gave the body of the imitation incarnation to the Holy Empire. She chose not to ascend to heaven but to remain behind in this world. She watched as her body was made into sacred relics and future generations of saints were created. She hoped for her successors to save the world. Eugene closed his eyes. He couldn't say anything. Molen was an idiot and that was an undeniable fact. But it wasn't just Molen. Everyone was an idiot. Although it wasn't exactly what they had wished for, didn't they save the world in the end? Had they not achieved peace, even if it were temporary? Then they could have lived happily for the rest of their lives, just as much as they had suffered. All they had to do was to live out their lives before dying before ascending to heaven. But no one had chosen to do so. This applied to Hamel as well. He died then reincarnated. Who cared if it was what Vermouth had intended? Hamel had been given a choice. He could have lived his second life in peace, but he had never considered it an option in the first place. He made the decision to see through the incomplete mission from his past life as if it were the most natural thing. He decided to devote his life to the mission of killing all the demon kings. It was just as Anise said. This was simply who they were. Show it to me next time, grumbled Eugene, pulling the cork from a new bottle. I'm talking about how many Nur you killed in the past 100 years, Molen. Where you stacked all of them. I do not want to show you. If I wanted to, I could have shown you the last time, responded Molen. Why not? Asked Eugene. Because the poison is too strong. I am used to it, but Hamel, your mind might break if you go there. You might become sick, answered Molen. Was that why Molen had told him to go back down? Eugene snorted at the idiotic kindness. Do you think I'm some kind of a fucking pushover? I won't go weird no matter how many bodies there are. I won't get sick. Eugene held himself back from asking a question. He remembered how Molen's eyes had been. They had been similar to how Vermouth's had been in the dark room. Different, cold, emotionless, tired and muddy. Promise me, said Eugene. He couldn't bear to leave Molen alone. Promise me that you will take me there after the night march. Show me what you have seen in the last 100 years. Are you planning on leaving me behind? Asked Denise with a smile. If Hamel goes, I am going as well. I have to stand where you two stand. Anise, you, muttered Molen. Molen. You have absolutely no talent for lying. You are worried about us? That's a lie, is it not? The only truth from what you've said is that you don't want to show us. Anise wasn't considerate of Molen like Eugene. She was a malicious woman with a talent for hurting people's feelings since 300 years ago. What you do not want to show us, it's not simply the bodies of monsters. Molen couldn't refute Anise. And whatever it is that you do not want us to see, I want to see it no matter what, said Anise. After a moment of dazed blinking, Molen burst into laughter, his booming chuckles echoing off the walls. He then nodded to himself and gave his own head a light tap before speaking. You two haven't changed a bit, he said with a grin. Have you changed? Asked Anise. I tried not to, answered Molen. That's enough. Now that we've roughly understood your situation, let's enjoy our drinks, said Anise before bringing her liquor to her lips. That alone changed the mood. Eugene parted his lips while patting Mare's wiggling head. By the way, Molen, is it fine for you to be here now? Didn't I say it earlier? I can see Lehanjar from here as well. The Nur has not appeared yet. If it comes out, I will go and kill it, responded Molen. He had remained in Lehanjar for 100 years when he could do such a thing. Idiot, murmured Eugene while sipping his own bottle. I do not like that word, but I don't hate it when you call me an idiot, said Molen with a smile, tipping his own bottle as well.